another highlight coming right now, and we are going to speak about the framework and conditions for economic growth and resilience. And we have another fantastic panel for you here on this session aligned. Ladies and gentlemen, it gives me great pleasure to welcome to the stage. I'm going to get a quick sign here. So, ladies and gentlemen, first up, we have from the Ministry of Finance, State Secretary Heiko Thoms. Please give him a warm welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Please join me, Heiko Thoms. And we have... I know. I think we are mixing up. First of all, thank you so much. You've right on board without having even had to call your name. The Ukrainian Minister of Finance, of course, Minister Marchenko. Great to have you with us. Thank you so much. This is your applause. It's great. Please come and join me. And there he is. There is your counterpart, State Secretary. Please, to my left, or have a seat. At this point, we're just rolling with it. We're having also the president of the European Investment Bank here, ladies and gentlemen. Please welcome Nadia Calvino is here. Is not here yet. Delay. Well, I fully understand. Well, let's hope we can get her here. Do we have the former US Secretary of State here? As you can see, we're improvising and making this up as we go. Suffice to say, I already have, there you go. We have the 70th US Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, is here with us, ladies and gentlemen. It's great to have you with us. Please have a seat. And you know, without further ado, why don't we just get started? There's been some changes here due to President Zelensky's speech here at the German Parliament. Yes, of course. And we're still missing the CEO of the Deutsche Bank. There he is, Christian Sewing, ladies and gentlemen. Please, Mr. Sewing, if you could come here. And if we have too many chairs, perhaps we can also, there you go. We're missing one more person. And it's great to have you with us. Obviously, the CEO of Deutsche Bank, Christian Sewing. Thank you so much for joining us. We're still missing the president of the European Investment Bank, who I'm sure will join us just a bit. But I suggest we go right ahead. And obviously, Minister Marchenko, first of all, thank you for being here. Thank you for being in Berlin, taking part in the very, very important Ukraine Recovery Conference. I want to give you a chance, first of all, for some opening remarks. The subject matter is, of course, as it has been from the get-go, from this very morning, how to move the recovery process in Ukraine forward. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much.
Yes.
Can you hear me? Good. It's a great pleasure to be here, because for Ukraine it's an important event. I believe, first of all, we should be grateful for organizer of this event, which help us to gather together all necessary people, specifically for business, to help to understand how to incentivize business incentive in Ukraine, because it's our major goal for this conference to create necessary grounds for business-to-business contacts, for possible to sign in some memorandums or future investment in Ukraine, because it's our very clear goal that we would like to have business to operate in Ukraine, invest in Ukraine, for prosperity people of Ukraine and prosperity Europe. Because I believe the joint interest of Europe to take part, to care of Ukraine as a possible future very good destination for investment. And now we should create necessary ground for safety. And President Zelensky mentioned that it's quite necessary before thinking about reconstruction to think about security. Air defense system is very necessary and very good solution. And as a Minister of Finance, I care about taxes more than anything else. And of course, I would like to have our budget balanced But it's midterm perspective. Now it's impossible, I believe. And again, the fact that we are here, the fact we have macro stability in Ukraine, in May, inflation in Ukraine was 3.3%. We also managed to collect 35% more revenues in comparison with 5 months last year. It means that, generally speaking, the fact we have macro stability, the fact we have been able to collect necessary revenues, it's also a good signal for business to think about Ukraine. But again, a good explanation that it's support of our partners. And again, to my final statement, I am so grateful for joint support of G7 nations that we have been able to survive during this very harsh period. I constantly repeating this. We need your support and we rely on you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much to Minister Marchenko. And I think the support, and hopefully you have felt the support since this morning, very much so, from all stakeholders and speakers here on this stage, but obviously also beyond. State Secretary Toms, great to have you with us. We fully understand that Minister Christian Lindner had to rush off to the German Parliament for the speech of President Zelensky, but also, of course, you are here to represent the German Ministry of Finance, and would like to hear your opening remarks.
Well, let me just say very briefly that first and foremost, the signal from this conference is that Germany will continue to support Ukraine as long as it takes and with whatever means it takes. We're committed to this. This is a substantial financial burden, clearly. But let's not forget that while we pay with our resources, Ukrainians are paying with their lives to defend their freedom and also to defend our freedom. Let me say, nationally, we have already contributed 34 billion euros to Ukraine. We are now having a new package from the EU side, another 50 billion to meet the financing needs until the end of 27. That's in combination with the US package of $61 billion. That's a very strong signal. Also, it's a strong signal that we have managed to arrange the financial flows from the interest generated by the immobilized Russian assets now within the EU framework. So the EU has done its homework on this. We have shown some leadership also within the G7 group that we are now able to let these financial flows go to the benefit of Ukraine right away. And we are also now, you know that at this point in time in the G7 framework, working on ways to leverage and front load those financial flows from the interest generated from the immobilized Russian assets furthermore. So that's another strong signal that we're committed to meet Ukraine's finance needs also in the future.
Thank you so much also to State Secretary Toms for your initial remarks at this particular point. Also a very warm welcome, of course, to the EIB's president. Great to have you with us, Ms. Calvino. I'm going to come to you in just a moment, but if you allow me, Minister Marchenko, just a very quick follow-up question perhaps, because the previous panel and the statements before have obviously been talking about at the end of the day, the coordination process, which is not going to be an easy task with so many stakeholders involved. I was wondering, how do you coordinate that financial support from donors and all the stakeholders coming together at once?
First of all, yesterday we gathered our multi-donor coordination platform. It was we meeting on a constant basis once per 2 months, once per 3 months. It helped us to better coordinate our efforts on our budget needs. It helped us to coordinate in reconstruction needs as well as reforms. So it's a very important venue when we gather together all G7 nations as well as other well-represented countries like Sweden, Netherlands, Norway, which contributed for Ukraine's prosperity, South Korea. And it helped us to generate a very impactful decision because we have secretariat in place. It's not something like we would like to have, like Ramstein, for example, because in Ramstein there are a lot of military people involved. They can better decide logistics of military supplies. But I believe that we're in a good way forward. And this level of coordination can help us to get necessary attention for all the 7 nations and to prepare and provide necessary information from within Ukraine. What's our great needs? What's our potential for mobilization? What our restrictions? What our obstacles? How we can resolve it? And it's very important discussions we held. And I believe that in future we can manage this platform in a constant basis, and it helps us to get all the resources and all support which we seeking for.
Thank you so much. And State Secretary Thompson, also a very quick follow-up. You've talked about your steadfast support and the financial support that your country has delivered and will continue to deliver. I wonder, how has financial support for Ukraine evolved over time? Perhaps you can briefly speak to that. Have there been some involvements, the process that you've been going through, I'm sure has been its ups and downs. I was wondering what you...
Well, I think for the moment it's really ups, because with the package we have seen from the US side and also the 50 billion that we have mobilized only for the next 3 years also on the EU level, that's a significant increase. Also, what I talked about, the interest that we are taking from the immobilized Russian assets will potentially have an impact of another 50 billion that we can front load. That's significant numbers, so the trend in this respect is positive. But let me say the point which is most important to us, that in the end, of course, when it comes to the recovery, but also before, what we need to do is really mobilize also private capital for the reconstruction of Ukraine. We're very happy that Christian Sewing is on that panel tonight, and he will certainly speak about that later on. But clearly, when it comes to rebuilding Ukraine, even in this phase, what needs to be done is mobilize more private capital, more private resources. In the end, the financing needs for Ukraine are huge, and I believe that 90% in the end will have to come from the private sector.
Thank you so much indeed. Let me turn to EIB President Calvino. It's great to have you with us. Obviously, the European Investment Bank, a major player, an important player in the context of Ukraine's recovery process. I'd like to hear your short opening remarks and then have a quick follow-up.
Yes, well, good afternoon. I apologize that due to the change of the timing, I had to run to wrap up also some signatures, you know.
No apologies necessary.
This event is all about delivery, concrete results on the ground. So we were also wrapping up signatures and statements. And as I was delivering those remarks, I was thinking that a couple of months ago, Serhiy Marchenko, we worked together with Prime Minister Shmyhal, and we had a couple of meetings in Luxembourg, also in Washington, where we talked about prioritization, coordination that you were referring to, and we also agreed that we would accelerate the deployment of projects on the ground. And I was thinking today how proud I am that we're really walking the talk and we are delivering on our commitments. We have signed 4 actually very important agreements today. First, to mobilize support to the private sector, to SMEs in Ukraine, mobilizing more than 1 billion euros in investment through the financial sector. Secondly, to repair infrastructures in the key Ukrainian cities. And here we're talking about schools, kindergartens, hospitals, houses, water supply that has been damaged by the war. Thirdly, we are also agreeing to extend to Ukraine the flagship advisory service of the European Union. That's known as JASPERS. And all the countries that have gone through the accession process and have joined the European Union know very well that JASPERS is the flagship program to support the technical assistance, the governance and capacities of the government in joining the European Union. And finally, we've signed an agreement with a memorandum of understanding with the German government also to support the deployment of renewables in Ukraine. So it's not only about building, but building back better and really having a sustainable reconstruction in the country. On top of that, here in this conference, we are able to communicate to our Ukrainian partners that we have already adopted a number of agreements to recover and repair the railway infrastructures, the border crossings to the EU, the metros and trams in Kiev and Lviv, the key cities. We are also working on a pan-European export guarantee, and of course, all these projects will be deployed on the basis of the 50 billion EU guarantee program that Heiko Thoms, the Secretary of State, was referring to. So my thought, is how we are really delivering on the ground and how we're doing it together. Because these signatures are the result of a very close partnership, friendship, I would say brotherhood and sisterhood, if I may, with the Ukrainian government. We work hand in hand on a daily basis to coordinate our actions with the national member states, Germany and others. With the other European institutions, we could not deliver these without the guarantees and mandates from the European budget. And finally, with the private sector, the banks and the companies that are starting to see that recovery for Ukraine is not a matter for the future, but a matter of now.
Yeah, it's not an issue for the future. It is, of course, but more importantly, it has to start now. It has to be implemented now. Thank you so much. Before I turn to the distinguished business section to my left here, let me also very quickly follow up, Nadia Calvino. You've talked about the chances, of course, and the opportunities. What are some of the risks and challenges that you see throughout this process?
Well, obviously, right now we're in the middle of a war. So it is a moment when the public sector has to step up and de-risk investments. This is what we are doing. We are providing two very important assets to this equation. First, financial support through guarantees. I have referred to them. Also loans, also blending loans and subsidies to make these investments profitable. I think the pan-European export credit guarantee is going to be very, very important in reinforcing national schemes and supporting European SMEs exporting to Ukraine. So financial advantage, very important. But the second asset we bring into the equation is the technical expertise to ensure that whatever is done in Ukraine is compatible with the European standards. So we are already investing and preparing the country for the accession, a successful accession process to the European Union. And I think that is, where the public sector has a key role to play at this stage, and also mobilizing and bringing in the private sector, which I am sure will start, seeing Ukraine as a profitable opportunity too.
Indeed. Thank you, Nadia Calvino, the president of the European Investment Bank. Very delighted to turn now to the left to these very distinguished gentlemen. And we have with us, what a great honor, the 70th U.S. Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, with us. But Secretary, you're actually here today in your capacity as board of directors of VEON, a U.S.-listed company that owns, amongst other things, Kyivstar. Before we get into the discussion, also want to give you a chance for some quick opening remarks.
First of all, thank you. It's great to be here today. It's great to be here as the former 70th Secretary of State as well, which gives me a different take on this as a private U.S. citizen now trying to help an incredibly important Ukrainian asset, Kyivstar, that delivers telecommunications to mobile handset and data services to a huge number of Ukrainians in this difficult time. And it's had, all the issues, right? Towers get knocked down, power gets knocked out. They had a huge, Kyivstar suffered a huge Russian cyber attack in the fall of last year. It reminds us all how serious this matter is, how important it is that we make sure we get this right for the people of Ukraine. I can see this corner being turned that you just described, and the German government has been central to this, the European government has been central. I can see the corner begin to be turned where people now recognize that the work, right, the hard work, it's not just about big macro investments. This is about getting every piece of the economic ecosystem right so that this capital will flow. I'm convinced that capital providers from around the world, big and small, the biggest most important German bank, American banks, but the next tier of capital providers will welcome the opportunity to participate in the rebirth of the Ukrainian economy. I'm convinced of that, and we can grow GDP there in a way that will accelerate for the betterment of the lives of the Ukrainian people in the aftermath of this war, and I can see that. but it's the blocking and tackling you referred to, right? Think about, you've got to get the mortgage system right. You've got to get the regulatory system right. You have to build out all the infrastructure components, the pieces of the system, the technical system, so that bureaucracies can do this at the speed that is required to actually deliver. That's not a critique of Ukraine. The United States doesn't do that very well often either. You have to make sure that government is responsive when capital is prepared to come. And then the last piece is this transition from what has been largely global taxpayer finance support for the security of Ukraine, and I am thrilled and worked to ensure that the United States provided the $60+ billion that it did. This will begin to transition to a model that looks very different over time. It will look like a model that transitions through guarantees and subsidies and government support, government backing, credit backing as well, so that the capital can flow. But in the end, we have to ensure that the Ukrainian people get the schools rebuilt and the capacity to go train their workforce. All of these things are central features that will take time to go build out, but in the end will be the sustainable model that delivers a great outcome for Ukraine in the 2, 5, and 10 years that are in front of it. I'm optimistic that that will take place, but it will take the goodwill and hard work of people like that are sitting here to my right, and then the private sector actors that I'm confident will want to rebuild this in a way that that vindicates all the work that we've done. And I'll close with this idea. This comes back to the central thesis that frankly caused some in my party in the United States to be reluctant to provide U.S. taxpayer support, and that is, in the end, we have to make sure that Ukraine wins. The world needs to perceive that this was a European victory, that Ukraine was the victorious party in this conflict. When that perception is achieved, these private sector issues, this capital flow issues will happen. In the event that that's not the case, in the event that this looks like the aggressor was victorious, and folks like Xi Jinping or Chairman Kim or Vladimir Putin can continue their aggression, this will cause capital not to move into these places because the fear will be too great. The risk will be perceived as too high. So we have to make sure that this is concluded in a way that justifies all the amazing work of the Ukrainian people to defend their homeland and to defend European sovereignty. And I'm convinced it's when we get that right, I'm convinced that the private sector will step up in the way that this conference demonstrates so ably as well. And thank you all for hosting it here in Germany. You all have done a fantastic job hosting this conference too. So thank you.
Thank you, Secretary Pompeo, for your remarks. I think, please. I think the optimistic tone of your remarks very well received here in this audience and in the cities of Ukraine, that's for certain. Let me just follow up quickly, because from your unique perspective, you pointed out you may be in the business community now, but of course you have served as Secretary of State. So from your perspective and your background, what are some of the opportunities and challenges you see of doing business in the Ukraine today?
Oh my goodness. So look, we can list the challenges, the risks, but I see and know a incredibly wealthy nation. And when I say wealthy, I mean that in the most important way. First of all, the people. I've watched, particularly up close with respect to Kyivstar, I've watched some of the most resilient, amazing things. When I first got involved, I went there, I've had a chance to travel there a handful of times, and to go see the workforce and its dedication and commitment in the face of sirens going off is in the finest tradition of the human condition. And so I'm convinced when the conflict ends that that human capital will be deployed in ways that will deliver the technicals, the skills, all the things that the leadership, the management skill sets that capital providers are going to want. So I'm very optimistic about that. Second, I come from Kansas. In Kansas, we grow red winter wheat. You all compete with us in the global marketplace for red winter wheat. The agricultural base for Ukrainian's economy, the industrial base for the Ukrainian economy that has existed and will continue to exist, provide enormous opportunities. It's going to take a lot of capital, a lot of flows. There'll be some of this that'll be long return time capital, so there'll need to be credit structures that are put in place to make that capital affordable for these Ukrainian businesses. And then finally, I also watch a set of leaders in Ukraine, a Ukrainian government that has now demonstrated its capacity to organize and lay down a strategy on a global scale that will, I think, provide an enormous amount of comfort to Western capital providers in the years ahead. I'm convinced that the government now understands what it takes to provide basic rule of law, infrastructure, all the elements of government that provide the backdrop against which capital can flow. I think the Ukrainian government, and including the minister sitting here with me today, understand what will be required to get this to be right and are prepared to execute against that. So I am optimistic. It's not wishful thinking, I don't believe. I believe it is grounded in my understanding of the resources and talent skills that the Ukrainian people possess and what they'll be just as focused on in the years ahead as they have been pushing back against the evil of Vladimir Putin.
Optimism rooted in personal observations and experiences in dealing with the Ukrainian people. Thank you so much, Secretary Pompeo, for your remarks, and great to welcome back also on stage the Deutsche Bank CEO, of course, Mr. Seving. Great to see you. Last time you and I were on stage was 2 years ago in Singapore. In many ways, easier times perhaps, but an easier context, if you will. But here we are, of course, at the very important Ukraine Recovery Conference. Very much looking forward to your opening remarks.
Does it work?
Yes.
Thank you. Well, first of all, thank you very much for the invitation. And I think the best signal, in particular with the huge task we all have ahead of us, is actually the panel itself, that you have private and public people, so to say, on the panel. Because, you know, the World Bank is talking about a reconstruction amount of 500 billion euros, which is needed in order to rebuild Ukraine. And in my personal view, it is simply our joint obligation and joint responsibility. And if you think about the amount of 500 billion euros, with all the respect to all finance ministers of this world, it's simply not doable from the public side on its own. And therefore, you know, I really welcome also this morning's speeches by the Chancellor, by the President of the European Commission, when they talked about partnering up, obviously in particular with AIB, with KfW, but we then work with them and in order to actually leverage these amounts. And therefore, it must be a joint effort to stem this financing program going forward. And sometimes I feel that in the discussions, the financing of all this is only seen as kind of a task, but behind that, and that's also what I'm always talking about when we talk about the financing which is needed for other projects outside the Ukraine. What we are doing with that is financing growth. And what we need desperately back in Europe is growth. And therefore, I do think that actually the private sector has a huge task, has a huge opportunity here, and we simply need to find now the right solutions, not just talk about certain risks, and you talked about that, and of course we need to take this into account. But I do believe that actually banks, other financial institutions, but in particular banks with an investment bank and markets capability, can actually structure a lot. We will sign this week 2 MOUs, one in order to finance a power plant in the Ukraine, another one together with the World Bank in order to make the accessibility and the availability of trade finance facilities easier for companies investing there, but also for local companies. Deutsche Bank has been in the Ukraine for 30 years. Of course, we stayed also over the last 2 or 3 years. And for us, we actually see that as an opportunity to grow. And if we partner up with public institutions, if we can, in particular at the start of this program, while the war is still ongoing, we need to talk about the right risk sharing. If we get this right, I'm absolutely sure that we can not only put our own balance sheet into it, but that we are the entry point to global investors who actually sees an opportunity. And that's where I see our task. That's where I see the private institutions stepping in, because I think in this regard, we are potentially ahead and have the best feel who are the global investors and what kind of structures can we offer in order to get that diversified pool of money. And there's lots actually, and there's lots of interest.
Thank you so much, Christian Sewing, for outlining the importance of the German private sector to invest in Ukraine. And you've talked about the opportunities. You just very quickly alluded to some risks and challenges. Want to push back just a quick and give you also an opportunity, just like I did with the Secretary, with Secretary Pompeo, how you assess the risk and challenges right now of doing business in Ukraine. What are some of the main hurdles that you are encountering?
Well, it's obvious, and I'm repeating a little bit that what the others have said. I mean, you know, it is obviously still wartime, and that makes it for us as private institutions extremely difficult and complex to put a lot of money at risk, and therefore we can mitigate that with the right structures. We work with public authorities. Number two, if you think about global investors, it is actually governance going forward, because global investors have global expectations. They have one global standard. So with all the efforts Ukraine is doing in order to fight this war, to fight the aggressor, we need to now step ahead and think about what are the minimum expectations of investors from the world in terms of minimum governance, transparency, also talking about, so to say, business plans going forward. But I do think that actually banks and institutions like ours, because we know what the minimum expectations of investors are, we can help here. And that's our task now, to exactly find this point where we are in order to attract these investors. And again, there is a lot of interest, and we should not forget the opportunities, whether it's German corporates, European corporates, or global corporates, actually to invest. And there, I think the opportunities are, in my view, in the long term, higher than the risks.
Thank you so much to both of you for highlighting the opportunities and the hopes also, if you will, associated with the recovery process of Ukraine moving forward. Now, we heard from the political leaders, we heard from international organization representatives, and of course, two outstanding business leaders, former political leader. But I want to close by giving both you, Minister, but also State Secretary Toms, a couple of minutes, just perhaps after everything you've heard here, what hopes, not just what hopes did you come in with into the conference, but perhaps more importantly, what are you hoping to get out of here within the next 48 hours, today and yesterday? Minister, I want to start with you.
No, as a Minister of Finance, I rather prefer not to think about some hopes, but think about if we have money in our accounts or we have already investment which materialized. That's why, but generally speaking, I see a lot of good signals from all sides, from public side, from business side, from banks, which are able to attract additional attention towards Ukraine, additional funds for Ukraine, because it's very necessary right now for us. And I believe this conference will create necessary ground for future, because what we seek for is new investment in Ukraine. Even today, even right now, despite all of this problem, despite all of these obstacles which we see on the ground, we see a lot of good examples when business which already operate in Ukraine start and think how to improve their investments, how to invest more in Ukraine. They don't think about how to transfer money from Ukraine. They think about future. That's why it's a good example. And I believe that this kind of cooperation of business on the ground and business which would like to be participate in reconstruction in Ukraine, which would like to invest in Ukraine, it create natural grounds for future cooperation. And again, this conference sometimes take some attention because there are a lot of political debates concerning future of Ukraine, a lot of statements of support, etc. But the real nature of these events, what we can collect after that. And I believe that when we meet next year, we can remember this conference as an event which create necessary ground for future investment. This is my hope.
Yeah, absolutely. A hope, I think, that is being shared by everyone here on stage and in the audience, and certainly also beyond. Thank you so much. State Secretary Toms, you're going to get the final word on the stage. Also, your closing remarks is highlighting and articulating your hopes regarding the outcome of this important conference.
Well, this conference clearly is a great signal of support to Ukraine of the international community. I'd like to focus on something Christian Sewing just said, because Sergei, you mentioned that there will also be a lot of investment needed. I like to frame it as opportunities also in the future. That's how we have to see it for a positive future of Ukraine. But in order to do that, of course, we have to focus on the framework conditions. We're doing just that, and the international community is doing that. The IMF is having a leading role in formulating a program for Ukraine, which somehow leads the way. But then, of course, public actors, first and foremost, the EIB, but also other banks like EBRD or the Council of Europe Bank are doing important work. What they're bringing is not only capital, what they're bringing is also expertise, like you have expertise also, Deutsche Bank, other banks have expertise that they can bring to the country. And we're doing the same, because something Mike Pompeo just said, I think it's extremely important that in the end, it's also those little details that you have to focus on, little changes in the laws, because the governance structures, and you've made great progress here, the governance structures need to be right. We need to focus on small things like a reform of VAT or a reform of the excise tax. All those things do matter. Sometimes the way to freedom is paved with technicalities, but we're working on it. We work on it jointly, and this gives me hope, yes.
Thank you so much indeed. Ladies and gentlemen, framework and conditions for economic growth and resilience. I think you would agree, having listened to this outstanding panel, that the importance of this conference cannot be overstated. I think each and every one of you have greatly contributed with your insights into laying out the risks and challenges, but more importantly, the opportunities in investing and doing business in Ukraine. Ms. Marchenko, State Secretary Toms, President Calvino, Mike Pompeo, and of course, CEO Christian Sewing. Thank you so much for this valuable conversation. This is your applause. Much appreciated.